The scream cuts through the night like a knife through silk. Dr. Callan Hurst stands at the edge of the cliff, the Atlantic wind tearing at his jacket, and he hears it again. That sound. The one that has carved pieces out of his soul every night for 8 months. His daughter. Screaming in her sleep. He turns toward the keeper's cottage behind him. One window glows faintly on the second floor. The rest of the house sits dark, swallowed by fog and silence. He doesn't go to her. He never knows what to say. The beam from the lighthouse sweeps across the water, illuminating nothing but endless grey waves. Callan closes his eyes and asks the question he has asked every night since the ferry went down. How do you reach someone who has stopped speaking? How do you save a child who won't let you in? He thought he had tried everything. Every specialist. Every therapy. Every prayer. Until the day a woman showed up on his doorstep. A woman with a criminal record. A woman no one would hire. A woman who did what no therapist could. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. 6 months before that scream. 6 months before the stranger arrived. There was a different kind of sound. The sound of metal tearing. Water rushing. A woman's voice calling out one last time. India. Dr. India Rains had been Callan's research partner for 5 years. They worked together on marine conservation projects, tracking migration patterns of seals and documenting the effects of climate change on coastal ecosystems. The lighthouse keeper's cottage on the island had been their shared research outpost. Remote. Quiet. Perfect for the kind of deep work that required isolation. India had a daughter. Sienna. 8 years old. Bright eyes. Wild curls. A laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Callan had known Sienna since she was 3. He had watched her grow up between the tides, collecting shells, drawing pictures of seals, asking questions about everything. Why do waves crash? Where do the birds go at night? Do fish have dreams? India used to joke that Sienna would be a scientist one day. Or an artist. Or both. But that was before the ferry. It had been a routine supply run. India and Sienna took the small passenger ferry from the island to the mainland to pick up equipment and groceries. Callan stayed behind to finish a report. He waved them off from the dock that morning, coffee in hand, telling India he would have dinner ready when they got back. The ferry never made it to shore. A cargo ship, off course in the fog, struck it broadside. The impact split the hull. Passengers were thrown into the freezing Atlantic. Sienna had been on deck. India had been below, gathering their bags. When the water came, India pushed Sienna toward a life raft. Told her to hold on. Told her everything would be okay. Then the ferry listed. Capsized. Sank. Sienna made it to the raft. 17 other passengers survived. India did not. They found her body 2 days later. Callan got the call while he was standing in the lab, labeling slides. The Coast Guard officer on the other end spoke in flat, procedural tones. Victim recovered. Dental records confirmed. Next of kin. Callan did not remember dropping the phone. He did not remember sitting down. He only remembered the sound of his own breathing, too loud in the silence, and the knowledge that the world had just broken in half. India's will named him as Sienna's guardian. He had signed the paperwork 2 years earlier, a formality neither of them thought would ever matter. India had no other family. Her parents were dead. No siblings. No partner. So it fell to Callan, a man who had never raised a child. A man whose entire life had been about data and specimens and solitude. And now he was responsible for a little girl who had watched her mother drown. Sienna came back to the island 3 weeks after the funeral. A social worker brought her on the morning ferry, holding her hand as they stepped onto the dock. Sienna wore a black dress that was too big for her. Her hair had been brushed smooth. Her face was blank. Callan stood waiting, hands in his pockets, not sure what to do. Not sure what to say. The social worker smiled too brightly. She said all the right things. Trauma takes time. Children are resilient. Give her space. Be patient. Then she left. And Callan was alone with Sienna. He tried. God, he tried. He made her favorite meals. Pancakes with strawberries. Grilled cheese cut into triangles. Hot chocolate with marshmallows. She barely touched any of it. He set up her room exactly the way it had been before. Her stuffed animals arranged on the bed. Her books on the shelf. Her crayons in the cup on the desk. She did not play. She did not read. She only sat by the window, staring out at the water. And she did not speak. Not a single word. At first, Callan thought it was shock. Grief. He gave her time. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Still, nothing. He called specialists. The first was a child psychologist named Dr. Vanessa Kaur. She arrived on a chartered boat, wearing a tailored blazer and carrying a leather briefcase. She spent 2 hours with Sienna in the sunroom, using dolls and picture cards and soft, measured questions. Sienna sat in the chair, unmoving, and stared at the floor. Dr. Kaur emerged, looking frustrated. She pulled Callan aside and spoke in clinical terms. Selective mutism. Severe trauma response. Post-traumatic stress disorder. The child needs intensive intervention. Possibly residential treatment. Callan refused. He was not sending Sienna away. The next specialist was a speech therapist from Portland. She came with toys and games and a bright, chirpy voice that grated against the silence of the cottage. She tried to coax Sienna into making sounds. Any sounds. Humming. Clapping. Anything. Sienna threw a wooden block across the room and locked herself in the bathroom. The therapist left early. Then came the trauma counselor. A soft-spoken man in his 50s who specialized in childhood grief. He sat on the floor with Sienna and tried play therapy. Building blocks. Sand trays. Drawing. Sienna drew the same picture over and over. A woman's face. Sinking beneath waves. Mouth open. Eyes wide. Drowning. The counselor studied the drawings with a grave expression. He told Callan that Sienna was trapped in the moment of loss. That until she could process what happened, she might never speak again. He recommended a facility. Inpatient care. Structured therapy. Again, Callan said no. He could not do that to her. He could not send her away to strangers in a sterile building where she would be just another case file. So he kept trying. He read books on trauma. Articles on selective mutism. Forums for parents of grieving children. He learned about grounding techniques and safe spaces and the importance of routine. He established a schedule. Breakfast at 8. Quiet time in the morning. Lunch at noon. Walks along the beach in the afternoon. Dinner at 6. Bedtime at 8. Sienna followed the routine like a ghost. She ate when food was placed in front of her. She walked when he led her outside. She went to bed when he turned off the lights. But she did not engage. She did not smile. She did not speak. And every night, she screamed. Callan would lie awake in his room, listening to the sound of her terror echoing through the cottage. He would get up, stand outside her door, press his palm against the wood. But he never went in, because he did not know what to do once he was inside. How do you comfort a child when you are drowning in your own grief? How do you offer hope when you have none left? India had been more than a colleague. She had been his partner in every sense that mattered. They had spent years side by side, building something meaningful. Their work. Their friendship. The quiet understanding that maybe, one day, it could be more. But they had never said it out loud. Never crossed that line. And now she was gone. Callan blamed himself. He should have gone with them that day. He should have been on the ferry. Maybe he could have saved her. Maybe he could have done something. Instead, he had stayed behind. And now he was left with a child he did not know how to reach and a guilt that swallowed him whole. The cottage became a prison. Beautiful. Isolated. Suffocating. The days blurred together. Research reports went unfinished. Emails piled up. Funding agencies sent letters asking for updates. Callan ignored them all. His entire world shrank to one question. How do I help her? And he had no answer. Then, on a cold morning in early spring, everything changed. Callan received a letter. Official. Typed on government letterhead. It was from the State Child Welfare Office. They had received a report. Concerns about Sienna's living conditions. Isolation. Lack of educational support. Insufficient mental health intervention. An evaluation was being scheduled. A social worker would visit within 30 days. If conditions were found unsuitable, alternative placement would be considered. Callan read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. They were going to take her. He called the number at the bottom of the page. Spoke to a woman with a tired voice who recited policy in flat, bureaucratic terms. Sienna needed stability. Structure. A support system. Could he provide that? Callan did not know how to answer. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter, and made a decision. He could not do this alone anymore. He needed help. Real help. He called a staffing agency that specialized in remote placements. Lighthouse keepers. Research assistants. Island caretakers. People willing to live in isolation for months at a time. The woman on the phone listened to his situation. A child. Trauma. Need for household management and possibly someone who could connect with her. There was a long pause. Then she said, "We have someone. But I need to be honest with you, Dr. Hurst. She is not what you would expect." Callan did not care. Send her. 5 days later, the supply boat arrived. Callan was down at the tidal pools, collecting samples, when he heard the horn. He climbed the rocks and walked back toward the dock, expecting the usual delivery. Crates of food. Boxes of equipment. Mail. But when he reached the cottage, he found the front door ajar. He stepped inside. And stopped. There was someone in his kitchen. A woman stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She wore a faded denim jacket over a black tank top. Her hair was buzzed short on one side, longer on the other, streaked with silver. She was lean, angular, her movements efficient and deliberate. She did not turn around when he entered. Callan's voice came out sharper than he intended. "Who the hell are you?" The woman glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes were grey. Storm cloud grey. "Your new hire. Reed Coulter. The agency sent me." Callan blinked. "I did not." He stopped. He had requested help weeks ago. But he had forgotten. "You need someone to manage supplies, maintain equipment, handle logistics while you do the science stuff." She turned off the burner. "That's me." Callan crossed his arms. "The agency did not mention you were a woman." Reed raised an eyebrow. "Would that have mattered? This is a remote location. Limited privacy. No other staff. I just think. I have lived in worse." Reed interrupted. "And I do not care about privacy. I care about work." There was something in her voice. Flat. Unsentimental. Like she had survived things that left no room for pleasantries. Callan hesitated. "You have references?" 3. All glowing. Reed wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Also, I noticed your girl upstairs has not eaten since yesterday. Kitchen was empty. Pantry is a mess. So I made soup." His jaw tightened. "You went into her room?" "No." Reed's voice softened. "Just a fraction. I knocked. She did not answer. But I left a bowl outside her door. Still there. Untouched." Callan looked away. Guilt and anger twisted together in his chest. "You can send me back," Reed said. "But the next boat does not come for 5 days. And in the meantime, someone has got to make sure this place does not fall apart." He stared at her. This stranger with sharp eyes and a soup pot. And he realized he did not have the energy to fight. "Fine," he muttered. "You can stay. But stay out of my way." Reed nodded once. "Deal." That night, Callan lay in bed and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving through the cottage. Footsteps in the hall. Water running. The creak of the old rocking chair on the porch. He did not sleep. Upstairs, Sienna sat at her desk, staring at the bowl of soup outside her door. The steam had long since stopped rising. She picked up her pencil and began to draw again. But this time, something was different. The woman in the water still had her mouth open. Still sinking. But above the surface, barely sketched, was another hand. Reaching back. Reed Coulter did not ask questions. That was the first thing Callan noticed. Most people who came to the island, researchers, journalists, the occasional lost tourist, asked everything. Why are you here alone? What happened to your partner? Why does the girl never leave her room? Reed just worked. She catalogued the storage shed, repaired the leaking rainwater system, reorganized the lab so everything was labeled and accessible. She moved through the cottage like someone used to making herself useful without being seen. Callan watched her from a distance. Suspicious. Guarded. On the third morning, he found her sitting on the rocks below the lighthouse, sketchbook open on her lap. I did not know you drew, he said, approaching cautiously. Reed did not look up. I do not. Not really. He glanced at the page. It was a detailed sketch of a seal basking on the rocks. Whiskers rendered in sharp, delicate lines. That is good. He admitted. Learned in prison. Reed said flatly. Callan froze. Reed finally looked up. Her expression was unreadable. The agency told you, right? No. She closed the sketchbook. 3 years. Assault. Got out 8 months ago. Her voice was steady. No shame. No apology. Still on parole. That is why I took this job. No one else would hire me. Callan's mind raced. He should send her back. He should. I am not dangerous. Reed continued. Not anymore. But if you want me gone, say the word. He stood there, wind whipping his hair, and realized something. He did not want her gone. Because for the first time in months, the cottage felt less like a tomb. Stay. He said quietly. Reed nodded. Okay. That afternoon, Callan returned from the tidal pools to find Sienna's door ajar. He froze. Inside, Reed sat cross-legged on the floor, several feet from the bed. Sienna was perched on the edge of the mattress, watching her warily. Reed was not speaking. She was drawing. Callan watched from the hallway as Reed sketched something on a large pad of paper, then turned it toward Sienna. It was a simple image. A lighthouse. A boat. Waves. Sienna stared at it. Then, slowly, she reached for a crayon. She drew a single line. A jagged bolt of lightning splitting the sky. Reed nodded, like this made perfect sense. She added rain to her drawing. Sienna drew a boat. Capsized. Reed drew a figure in the water. Sienna's hand trembled. She dropped the crayon. Reed did not push. She just closed the sketchbook and stood. That is enough for today, she said softly. Callan stepped back before she saw him. That night, he found Reed on the porch, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. You got her to draw with you, he said. Reed exhaled smoke into the dark. She was already drawing. I just joined her. The therapists could not do that. The therapists probably tried to fix her. Reed flicked ash over the railing. I am not trying to fix anyone. Callan leaned against the doorframe. What were you in prison for? Really? Reed was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. I put my stepfather in the hospital. He had been hurting my little sister for 2 years. I found out. I made sure he never could again. Callan's throat tightened. I do not regret it. Reed added. I would do it again. Did your sister? She testified against me. Reed's voice did not waver. Said I was lying. Said I was violent. She was 15 and terrified and did not know how to do anything else. I am sorry. Do not be. Reed crushed the cigarette under her boot. I learned something in prison. Sometimes the people you are trying to save do not want to be saved. But you still show up. You still try. She turned to go inside, then paused. That girl upstairs? She does not need saving. She needs someone to sit in the dark with her until she is ready to find the light herself. Callan watched her disappear into the cottage. For the first time in months, he felt something crack open inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. Weeks passed. The island softened into early summer. Seabirds nested in the cliffs. The tidal pools bloomed with anemones. The air smelled like salt and wild roses. Reed became part of the rhythm. She and Sienna did not speak. Sienna still had not said a word. But they drew together. Every afternoon, Reed sat on the floor of Sienna's room, and they passed images back and forth like a conversation in another language. Callan began to understand that language. When Sienna drew storms, Reed drew shelters. When Sienna drew drowning, Reed drew hands pulling upward. When Sienna drew darkness, Reed drew stars. "You are progressing," Callan said one evening, watching from the doorway. Reed glanced up. "Yeah, she is. You have done this before." "Not exactly." Reed set down her charcoal. "But I know what it is like to carry something you cannot say out loud." Callan stepped into the room for the first time in weeks. Sienna did not flinch. She was bent over her sketchbook, drawing with furious concentration. He knelt beside her. "Can I see?" She hesitated. Then, slowly, she turned the page toward him. It was not a storm this time. It was the lighthouse. The cottage. 3 figures standing on the rocks. One tall. One small. One with short, silver-streaked hair. Callan's breath caught. "That is us," he whispered. Sienna nodded. Reed stood quietly. "I will give you two some space." But before she could leave, Sienna reached out and grabbed her wrist. Reed froze. Sienna pulled her back down, pointed to the drawing, then to Reed, then to Callan. "Stay." Reed's eyes glistened. "Just for a second." "Okay," she murmured. "I will stay." That night, the 3 of them ate dinner together for the first time. Sienna did not speak, but she sat at the table. She ate. She even smiled once when Reed made a terrible joke about barnacles. Callan looked across the table at this woman. Ex-con, drifter, stranger, and he realized she had saved them both. But he also knew the outside world did not forgive that easily. And he was right. The letter arrived 3 days later. Callan tore it open, scanning the official letterhead. Tiernan Environmental Solutions. His stomach dropped. "What is it?" Reed asked, watching his face. "They are shutting us down." Reed stepped closer. "What?" "The company that owns the offshore drilling rights. They are filing an injunction against my research station, claiming environmental interference." "That is insane." "It is strategic." Callan's voice hardened. "My data proves their drilling is destroying marine habitats. If I publish, they lose billions. So they are coming after my credibility instead." He read further. His blood turned cold. "They are also filing a child welfare complaint, claiming Sienna is in an unsafe environment. Isolated. Unsupervised." Reed went very still. "They are using her to get to you. And they are using you." Callan's eyes met hers. "They found out about your record. They are arguing I am negligent for hiring a violent offender to work around a traumatized child." Reed's jaw tightened. "I will leave. Tonight." "No." "Callan." "No." His voice cracked. "You are the only reason she is getting better. If you leave, she will break again. And if I stay, they will take her from you anyway." Silence stretched between them like a wire-pulled taut. Upstairs, a door creaked open. Sienna appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her sketchbook. She looked at them both. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Reed climbed the stairs slowly. She knelt in front of Sienna. "Hey. It is okay." Sienna shook her head violently. "I am not going anywhere." Reed whispered. "I promise." Sienna opened her sketchbook. She had drawn a new picture. The 3 of them again. But this time, waves were crashing over the lighthouse. Figures in suits stood on the shore, pointing. At the bottom, in shaky letters, she had written one word. "Stay." Callan's throat closed. Reed pulled Sienna into her arms. The girl did not resist. She clung. "We fight," Reed said, looking at Callan over Sienna's shoulder. "We fight, and we win." The days before the hearing moved like a slow-motion nightmare. Callan hired a lawyer, Maria Santos, a scrappy woman in her 40s who had built her practice defending underdogs. She arrived on the island with a battered briefcase and a sharp mind. She sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the complaint, her expression growing darker with every page. "This is dirty," she said finally. "They are not actually concerned about Sienna. They want to discredit your research." "I know." Maria looked at Reed. "And you are the weapon they are going to use." Reed met her gaze without flinching. "So what do? We tell the truth," Maria said. "We show them what is actually happening here. That Sienna is thriving. That you are not a threat. That this family, unconventional as it is exactly what she needs." Callan leaned forward. "Will that be enough?" Maria was quiet for a beat. "I do not know. But it is all we have." They spent the next week preparing. Reed submitted to a background check, a polygraph, a psychological evaluation. She answered every invasive question with the same flat honesty she had shown Callan. Yes, she had been in prison. Yes, she had assaulted someone. No, she was not a danger to children. No, she did not regret protecting her sister. The evaluator, a stern woman with rimless glasses, studied Reed for a long time after the interview. "You are telling the truth," she said finally. "But the truth does not always matter in court." Reed nodded. "I know." Callan compiled evidence. Sienna's drawings, arranged chronologically. The progression was undeniable. Early images, all violence and drowning. Recent images, lighthouses and families and hope. He wrote statements. Documented the daily routines. The meals shared. The walks on the beach. The quiet moments of connection. He called the supply boat workers who had seen Sienna over the months. They agreed to testify. Said they had watched her change. Watched her start to heal. But the night before the hearing, Callan could not sleep. He sat on the porch, staring out at the dark water, and felt the weight of everything pressing down. What if they lost? What if the court decided Reed was unfit? What if they took Sienna away? Reed found him there. Sat beside him without a word. "I am scared," Callan admitted. His voice barely above a whisper. "Me too. If we lose her, we will not." "You do not know that." Reed looked at him. "No. But I know that little girl upstairs finally feels safe. And I will burn the whole world down before I let anyone take that from her." Callan turned to her. And for the first time, he saw past the walls she kept so carefully constructed. He saw the woman who had spent 3 years in prison for protecting someone she loved. The woman who had lost everything and kept going. The woman who had walked into his broken home and pieced it back together with nothing but presence and patience. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Really?" Reed was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because no one did it for me." Her voice cracked. Just slightly. "When I was in that cell, I used to dream that someone would show up. Someone who would believe me. Someone who would fight for me. But no one ever did. My sister turned on me. My mother did not visit. I was alone." She looked at Sienna's window, glowing softly in the dark. "I cannot change what happened to me. But I can make damn sure that girl knows she is not alone." Callan reached for her hand. She did not pull away. They sat there, side by side, holding on to each other in the quiet dark, and waited for morning. The courthouse was nothing like the island. Fluorescent lights. Pale walls. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and fear. Callan sat at the defense table, hands clenched. Reed sat beside him, wearing the only formal clothes she owned. A borrowed blazer. Dark jeans. She looked like she was facing a firing squad. Sienna was in a side room with a court-appointed child advocate. A kind-faced woman who had spoken gently to her, asking if she was okay, if she felt safe. Sienna had nodded. But she had not spoken. The Tiernan lawyers were polished. expensive suits, cold eyes. They presented their case with surgical precision. Dr. Hurst is emotionally unstable. The lead attorney said. The island is isolated. Dangerous. The child has not spoken in 8 months. And the so-called assistant is a convicted felon. He gestured toward Reed like she was evidence of a crime. Your Honor, this is a clear case of neglect masquerading as research. Maria Santos stood. Objection. That is a characterization, not a fact. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, nodded. Sustained. Stick to the evidence, Counselor. The Tiernan attorney smiled. Of course, Your Honor. He called his first witness. A child psychologist who had never met Sienna but had reviewed the case files. The psychologist testified that selective mutism in such prolonged cases indicated severe ongoing trauma. That isolation could exacerbate symptoms. That the child needed structured, professional intervention. Maria cross-examined. Did you ever speak to Sienna yourself? No. Did you visit the home? No. So your testimony is based entirely on reports written by people who also never lived with her? The psychologist hesitated. That is correct. Maria nodded. No further questions. The Tiernan attorney called more witnesses. A social worker who cited statistics on childhood trauma. An education expert who questioned the lack of formal schooling. Each one painted a picture of a child in crisis. A guardian out of his depth. A dangerous stranger in the home. Then it was Maria's turn. She called the supply boat captain. A grizzled man in his 60s who had been delivering to the island for 20 years. Have you noticed any changes in Sienna over the past few months? Maria asked. Yeah. He said. She used to hide when I came. Would not look at me. Last month, she waved. The courtroom murmured. Maria called one of the other boat workers. A woman who had brought groceries. She smiled when I gave her a package of crayons. The woman said. First time I ever saw her smile. Maria called the Coast Guard officer who had recovered India's body. He testified that Callan had been cooperative, devastated, and doing everything he could for Sienna. Then Maria called Callan. He took the stand, his heart pounding. Maria asked him to describe the last 8 months. He spoke slowly, carefully, about the grief, the failure, the desperate search for help. And then Reed arrived. He said. And everything changed. How? Callan looked at Reed. She sat perfectly still, eyes locked on him. She did not try to fix Sienna. He said. She just sat with her. And that was what Sienna needed. Not someone trying to make her talk. Someone willing to listen to her silence. The Tiernan attorney cross-examined. Mr. Coulter has a violent criminal record. Is that correct? Yes. And you allowed her unsupervised access to your traumatized ward? Callan's jaw tightened. She was never unsupervised. I was always nearby. And she never once did anything that made me question her. But you knew she had assaulted someone? I knew she had protected her sister. Callan's voice was firm. There is a difference. The attorney smirked. Is there? Yes. The judge intervened. Move on, Counselor. Finally, Maria called Reed. The Tiernan attorney smiled. Of course, Your Honor. He called his first witness. A child psychologist who had never met Sienna but had reviewed the case files. The psychologist testified that selective mutism in such prolonged cases indicated severe ongoing trauma. That isolation could exacerbate symptoms. That the child needed structured, professional intervention. Maria cross-examined. Did you ever speak to Sienna yourself? No. Did you visit the home? No. So your testimony is based entirely on reports written by people who also never lived with her? The psychologist hesitated. That is correct. Maria nodded. No further questions. The Tiernan attorney called more witnesses. A social worker who cited statistics on childhood trauma. An education expert who questioned the lack of formal schooling. Each one painted a picture of a child in crisis. A guardian out of his depth. A dangerous stranger in the home. Then it was Maria's turn. She called the supply boat captain, a grizzled man in his 60s who had been delivering to the island for 20 years. Have you noticed any changes in Sienna over the past few months? Maria asked. Yeah, he said. She used to hide when I came. Would not look at me. Last month, she waved. The courtroom murmured. Maria called one of the other boat workers, a woman who had brought groceries. She smiled when I gave her a package of crayons. The woman said. First time I ever saw her smile. Maria called the Coast Guard officer who had recovered India's body. He testified that Callan had been cooperative, devastated, and doing everything he could for Sienna. Then Maria called Callan. He took the stand, his heart pounding. Maria asked him to describe the last 8 months. He spoke slowly, carefully, about the grief, the failure, the desperate search for help. And then Reed arrived. He said, and everything changed. How? Callan looked at Reed. She sat perfectly still, eyes locked on him. She did not try to fix Sienna. He said. She just sat with her. And that was what Sienna needed. Not someone trying to make her talk. Someone willing to listen to her silence. The Tiernan attorney cross-examined. Miss Coulter has a violent criminal record. Is that correct? Yes. And you allowed her unsupervised access to your traumatized ward? Callan's jaw tightened. She was never unsupervised. I was always nearby. And she never once did anything that made me question her. But you knew she had assaulted someone? I knew she had protected her sister. Callan's voice was firm. There is a difference. The attorney smirked. Is there? Yes. The judge intervened. Move on, counselor. Finally, Maria called Reed. The courtroom went silent as Reed walked to the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible. Swore to tell the truth. The Tiernan attorney circled her like a shark. Miss Coulter, you served 3 years for aggravated assault. Is that correct? Yes. And now you work in close proximity to a vulnerable child. Yes. Do you believe that is appropriate? Reed looked him dead in the eye. I believe I am the only person who has helped her start healing. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. And how exactly have you helped her? Reed did not flinch. I sat with her. I did not try to make her talk. I did not try to fix her. I just let her know she was not alone. That is not therapy. No. Reed said. It is humanity. The attorney shifted tactics. You have no formal training. No credentials. Why should this court believe? Because she drew me into her world. Reed interrupted. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. That little girl has not spoken since she watched her mother die. But she draws. And when I started drawing with her, she stopped drawing death. She started drawing life. The courtroom was silent. She drew the 3 of us together. Reed continued. She drew us as a family. And maybe that does not mean anything to you. But it means everything to her. The attorney paused. You are very emotionally invested, Miss Coulter. Yeah, Reed said. I am. Is it not true that you are only here because no one else would hire you? Reed's eyes hardened. It is true that I made a choice to protect someone I loved, and the system punished me for it. It is true that I have lived in places you could not imagine and survived things you will never understand. And it is true that I came to that island because I had nowhere else to go. She leaned forward slightly. But it is also true that I would die before I let anything happen to that child. The courtroom went silent. The judge studied Reed for a long moment. Step down, Miss Coulter. Reed returned to her seat. Callan reached under the table and squeezed her hand. Then the judge spoke. I would like to see the child. Sienna entered the courtroom, clutching her sketchbook. The child advocate walked beside her. The judge's expression softened. Sienna, she said gently. I know you do not like to talk. That is okay. But I need to understand something. Do you feel safe where you are? Sienna nodded. Do you want to stay with Dr. Hurst and Miss Coulter? Sienna nodded again. More vigorously. Can you show me why? Sienna opened her sketchbook. She held up the drawing of the three of them on the rocks. Then she flipped to the next page. It was a new drawing. One Callan had not seen. It showed Reed and Callan on either side of her, holding her hands. Above them, in careful letters, she had written two words. My family. The judge's expression softened further. Thank you, Sienna. The ruling came swiftly. The court finds no evidence of neglect. The judge said. Tiernan's complaint is dismissed with prejudice. Callan exhaled. But the judge was not finished. I want to be clear. What saved this case was not credentials or wealth or institutional authority. It was two people who chose to show up for a child when no one else could reach her. She looked directly at Reed. That is what family is. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Callan shielded Sienna. Reed kept her head down. But one journalist called out, Miss Coulter, how does it feel to be vindicated? Reed stopped, turned. I did not do this to be vindicated, she said. I did it because she needed someone who would not leave. And then they walked away. Together. The ferry ride back to the island was quiet. Sienna sat between Callan and Reed on the worn wooden bench, her head resting against Reed's shoulder. The sketchbook lay open on her lap. She had drawn a new picture during the hearing. The three of them, standing together, surrounded by light. Callan watched the mainland shrink behind them, the courthouse disappearing into the grey skyline, and felt something loosen in his chest. They had won. Not just the case. Not just custody. They had won the right to stay together. Reed stared out at the water, her expression unreadable. She had not said much since they left the courtroom. Just held Sienna's hand and walked in silence. Callan wanted to say something. Thank you felt too small. I am sorry felt too late. So he said nothing. Just sat beside them and let the sound of the ocean fill the space between words. When they reached the island, the lighthouse keeper who ran the dock waved them in. He was an old man named Morris who had known India. He had cried when he heard about the accident. Welcome home, he said, helping Sienna off the boat. She looked up at him. Did not speak. But she smiled. Morris blinked, surprised. Then he smiled back. Good to see you, little one. They walked up the path to the cottage. The sun was setting, casting everything in gold and amber. The air smelled like salt and wild thyme. Seabirds called from the cliffs. It looked the same, but it felt different, like a place they could finally breathe. That night, Callan made dinner. Nothing fancy. Pasta with butter and garlic. A salad from the greens Reed had started growing in the garden. They ate at the kitchen table. Sienna twirled her fork slowly, watching the candlelight flicker. Reed poured water into 3 glasses. Passed one to Sienna. One to Callan. To family. Callan said quietly, raising his glass. Reed met his eyes. Held his gaze for a beat longer than necessary. To family. She echoed. Sienna lifted her glass. Did not say anything. But she clinked it against theirs. And for the first time in 8 months, the cottage did not feel like a tomb. It felt like home. The days that followed were soft. Not easy. Healing was never easy. But softer than before. Reed and Sienna continued their drawing sessions. Every afternoon, they sat on the floor of Sienna's room, passing images back and forth. The pictures changed. Fewer storms. Fewer capsized boats. More trees. More animals. More light. Callan joined them sometimes. He was clumsy with the crayons. His drawings looked like something a child would make. But Sienna did not seem to mind. She even laughed once when he tried to draw a seal and it came out looking like a blob with whiskers. It was a small sound. Barely audible. But it was there. Reed looked up, eyes wide. Did you hear that? Callan nodded, throat tight. Yeah, I did. They did not make a big deal of it. Did not push. Just kept drawing. But that night, after Sienna went to bed, Callan and Reed sat on the porch, and he let himself cry. She is coming back. He whispered. She is actually coming back. Reed reached over and took his hand. Yeah. She is. They sat there in the dark, holding on to each other, and let the relief wash over them like a tide. Weeks passed. The research station received new funding. Independent grants from environmental groups who had read Callan's preliminary reports and wanted to support the work. No strings attached. No corporate influence. Tiernan Environmental Solutions, meanwhile, was under federal investigation. Their offshore drilling permits had been suspended pending review. The legal team that had come after Callan was now scrambling to defend their own company. Callan did not take pleasure in it. But he did not feel guilty either. They had tried to destroy him. To take Sienna. To weaponize the legal system for profit. They had failed. And now the ocean they had tried to poison had a chance to heal. One morning, Callan woke to the smell of coffee and pancakes. He came downstairs to find Reed at the stove, flipping batter with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Sienna sat at the counter, coloring in a notebook. "Morning," Reed said without turning around. "Morning." Callan poured himself coffee. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Prison," Reed said flatly. Then she glanced over her shoulder and smirked. "Kidding. My grandmother. Before everything went to hell." Callan smiled. "She taught you well." Reed slid a plate of pancakes in front of Sienna. The girl picked up her fork and took a bite. Then she looked up at Reed and gave a small thumbs up. Reed's face softened. "You are welcome, kid." Callan watched them. This woman and this child. Two people who had every reason to be broken. Who had been failed by the systems meant to protect them. And yet here they were. Building something fragile and beautiful out of the ruins. He did not know what to call it. This thing between the three of them. But it felt like the closest thing to family he had ever known. That afternoon, they took a walk along the beach. It was Sienna's idea. She had tugged on Reed's sleeve and pointed toward the door. Reed raised an eyebrow. "You want to go outside?" Sienna nodded. "All right. Let's go." They walked down the narrow path that led to the shore. The tide was out. The sand was wet and firm beneath their feet. Gulls wheeled overhead. Sienna wandered ahead, picking up shells and bits of sea glass. She held each one up to the light, examining it carefully before tucking it into her pocket. Reed walked beside Callan, hands in her jacket pockets. "She is different," Callan said. "Stronger." Reed nodded. "She is finding her way back." "Because of you." Reed shook her head. "Because of her. I just gave her space to do it." Callan stopped walking. Turned to face her. "You did more than that. You saved her life." Reed looked away. "I do not know about that." "I do." There was a long silence. Then Reed said, "I got a call yesterday." Callan's stomach tightened. "From who?" "A non-profit. Based in Portland. They work with kids in the foster system. Trauma survivors. They heard about the case. And they want me to help design a program. Art-based therapy for kids who have been through hell. Teach them how to process what they cannot say." Callan felt something cold settle in his chest. "That is incredible." "Yeah." Reed's voice was quiet. "It is. But it is on the mainland." "Oh." They stood there, the ocean rolling in behind them, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. That leaving would break something. That staying might break something else. Sienna ran back to them, holding a piece of driftwood shaped like a bird. "Look." She did not say it out loud. Just held it up with wide, excited eyes. Reed knelt down. "That is beautiful. You should keep it." Sienna nodded. Then she looked at Callan. Then back at Reed. And in that moment, Callan saw it. The way Sienna had attached herself to Reed. The way she looked to her for comfort. For safety. If Reed left, it would devastate her. But if Reed stayed out of obligation, it would hollow her out. There was no good answer. That night, after Sienna went to bed, Callan found Reed on the rocks below the lighthouse. She was sitting with her back against a boulder, staring out at the water. A cigarette burned between her fingers. He sat down beside her. "You are thinking about the offer." Reed exhaled smoke. "Yeah. You should take it." She looked at him sharply. What? You should take it. Callan repeated. You could help hundreds of kids. Maybe thousands. You have a gift, Reed. And it would be selfish of me to ask you to stay here when you could do so much more out there. Reed's jaw tightened. What about Sienna? She will understand. Will she? Callan hesitated. Then he said, she will be hurt. But she will also be proud. Because you taught her something no one else could. That people can leave and still love you. That distance does not mean abandonment. Reed looked away. Her hands were shaking. I do not want to leave, she said quietly. I know. But I think I have to. I know. They sat in silence. The waves crashed against the rocks. The lighthouse beams swept overhead. Then Reed said, What about you? Callan blinked. What about me? What do you want? He looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who had walked into his life like a storm and left everything changed in her wake. I want you to be happy, he said. Even if that means you are not here. Reed's eyes filled. She turned away quickly, but not before he saw. Damn it, she muttered, wiping at her face. I do not cry. You just did. She let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, I guess I did. Callan reached over and took her hand. You are allowed to feel things, Reed. You spent 3 years in a place that tried to take that from you. But you are not there anymore. She looked down at their joined hands. I do not know how to do this. Do what? Care about people. Let them care about me. All of it. Callan squeezed her hand. You have been doing it for months. You just did not realize you have. Reed closed her eyes. A tear slipped free. And for the first time since she arrived, she let herself break. Callan pulled her close. She did not resist. Just leaned into him and cried. For her sister. For the years she lost. For the family she never had. And for the one she was about to leave. 2 weeks later, Reed stood in the cottage, packing her belongings into a single duffel bag. It did not take long. She had never owned much. A few changes of clothes. Her sketchbook. A photo of her grandmother. The piece of driftwood Sienna had given her. Everything that mattered fit into one bag. Sienna sat on the bed, watching her. Silent. Reed zipped the bag slowly. Then she sat down beside her. I know you are upset, Reed said softly. And I know this feels like I am leaving you. But I am not. I am just going somewhere else for a while. Sienna did not look at her. Reed reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook. She handed it to Sienna. I want you to draw me pictures. And I will draw you pictures. And we will send them to each other. Okay. Sienna took the notebook. Opened it. Inside, Reed had already drawn the first picture. The 3 of them on the rocks. The lighthouse behind them. At the bottom, she had written, You are not alone. Sienna's lip trembled. Then, so quietly Reed almost missed it, she whispered. Stay. Reed's breath caught. It was the first word Sienna had spoken out loud in 8 months. Reed pulled her close. Oh, sweetheart. I wish I could. Sienna clung to her. Please. Reed's tears fell freely now. I will come back. I promise. Birthdays. Holidays. Whenever I can. You are stuck with me, kid. Sienna buried her face in Reed's shoulder and cried. And Reed held her. Let her cry. Let her feel it all. Because that was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the ability to hold it and keep going. Callan stood in the doorway, watching. His own eyes wet. When Sienna finally pulled back, Reed cupped her face gently. You are the bravest person I know, Reed said. And I am so proud of you. Sienna wiped her eyes. Then she whispered again. Thank you. Reed smiled through her tears. You are welcome. The ferry arrived at noon. Morris helped load Reed's bag onto the boat. He shook her hand and told her to come back soon. Reed nodded. I will. Callan and Sienna walked her to the dock. The 3 of them stood there, the the wind pulling at their clothes, the ocean stretching out grey and endless. Reed looked at Callan. "Take care of her. Always. And take care of yourself." "I will try." Reed turned to Sienna. "Knelt down one last time. Remember what I told you. You are not alone. Ever." Sienna nodded. Then she threw her arms around Reed's neck and held on tight. Reed closed her eyes. Memorized the weight of her, the smell of her hair, the sound of her breathing. Then she let go. She climbed onto the ferry. The engine rumbled to life. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Reed stood at the railing and watched them. Callan with his arm around Sienna. Sienna waving with one hand, clutching her notebook with the other. Two people she had not known 6 months ago. Two people who had become everything. The island grew smaller. The lighthouse faded into the mist. But Reed did not look away. Not until they were completely gone. 1 year later. The community center in Portland was loud with the sound of children's laughter. Reed stood at the front of the room, watching as a group of kids worked on their drawings. Some used crayons. Some used charcoal. Some just pressed their hands into paint and smeared it across the paper. It did not matter what they used. What mattered was that they were creating. Translating pain into something they could hold. A little boy, maybe 6, held up his picture. It showed a house. A tree. A sun. "That is me," he said proudly. "After I am not scared anymore." Reed smiled. "That is you right now, too." The boy beamed. Reed's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from Callan. "She is asking if you are coming for her birthday. She says she will not blow out the candles without you." Reed smiled. Typed back. "Tell her I would not miss it for the world." Another message came through. A photo. Sienna on the rocks. Holding a baby seal pup. Grinning at the camera. Reed stared at the image. Her heart swelled. That smile. That joy. It had been earned. Fought for. Built piece by piece out of silence and patience and love. And Reed had been part of it. She saved the photo. Then she looked around the room. At the kids drawing their fears and their hopes. At the walls covered in their art. At the program she had built from nothing. This was her purpose. Not to save one child. But to reach as many as she could. To sit in the dark with them until they found their own light. A young girl approached her. She was maybe 9. Her name was Kira. She had been in 3 foster homes in 2 years. She held out a drawing. It showed 2 figures holding hands. "That is me and you," Kira said shyly. Reed knelt down. "It is beautiful. You are the first person who did not leave," Kira whispered. Reed's throat tightened. "I am not going anywhere." Kira hugged her. Quick and fierce. And Reed held her. Just like she had held Sienna. Because that was what she did now. She stayed. 2 weeks later, Reed boarded the ferry back to the island. It was early morning. The sun was just starting to rise. The water was calm and silver. She stood at the railing, her duffel bag at her feet, and watched the lighthouse come into view. When the ferry docked, she saw them. Callan and Sienna. Waiting. Sienna ran down the dock the moment the boat touched the pier. She crashed into Reed with enough force to knock her back a step. Reed laughed. Caught her. Held her tight. "Miss me?" Reed asked. Sienna pulled back. Looked up at her. And said, very clearly, "Yes." Reed's eyes filled. "Yeah. I missed you too, kid." Callan walked over. He looked good. Rested. Happy. "Welcome back," he said. Reed smiled. "Good to be back." They walked up the path to the cottage together. Sienna between them. Talking now. Telling Reed about the seals. About the tide pools. About the new drawings she had made. Her voice was still quiet. Still tentative. But it was there. And it was hers. That afternoon, they had a birthday party. Just the 3 of them. A chocolate cake Reed had baked. Candles shaped like stars. Sienna sat at the table, her eyes wide as they sang. Happy birthday to you. When they finished, Callan said, "Make a wish." Sienna closed her eyes. Thought for a long moment. Then she blew out the candles. "What did you wish for?" Reed asked. Sienna looked at her. Then at Callan. Then back at Reed. "That we stay together." Reed's breath caught. Callan reached across the table and took Reed's hand. Sienna took the other. And in that moment, sitting in the warm glow of candlelight, the three of them formed a circle. Not bound by blood. Not mandated by law. But chosen. Earned. Built from brokenness and patience and love. "That is my wish too," Callan said quietly. Reed squeezed their hands. "Mine too." Sienna smiled. The kind of smile that could light up the whole world. And for the first time in a long time, none of them felt alone. That night, after Sienna went to bed, Callan and Reed sat on the porch. The stars were out. The ocean was calm. The air smelled like summer. "I have been thinking," Reed said. About staying." Callan turned to her. "What do you mean?" "I mean splitting my time. A few weeks here. A few weeks in Portland. The program is running well. I have staff now. I do not need to be there every single day. And you want to be here." Reed looked at him. "Yeah, I do." Callan smiled. "We would like that." Yeah. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Reed said, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "What do you see when you look at me?" Callan blinked. Surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you look at me, do you see the ex-con? The woman with a record? The one who should not be around kids?" Callan shook his head slowly. "No." "Then what?" He looked at her. Really looked at her. "I see the woman who saved my daughter. The woman who taught me how to be a father. The woman who walked into my life when I had nothing left and gave me a reason to keep going." Reed's eyes filled. "I see family," Callan said. "That is what I see." A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. Callan reached over and took her hand. "You belong here, Reed. You always have." She let out a shaky breath. "I have never belonged anywhere. You do now." They sat there, holding hands. The ocean rolling in below them. The lighthouse beam sweeping overhead. And for the first time in her life, Reed let herself believe it. She belonged. Not because someone told her. Not because a court decided. But because she had built something real. Something lasting. A family. Months passed. Reed split her time between the island and Portland. She built a routine. 2 weeks on the island. 2 weeks on the mainland. It was not perfect. But it worked. Sienna thrived. She started school again. Made friends. Spoke more each day. She still had nightmares sometimes. Still drew pictures of her mother. But now, when she drew the ocean, it was not always violent. Sometimes it was calm. Beautiful. Full of life. Callan's research flourished. His data on marine conservation was published in major journals. Universities reached out. Foundations offered grants. But he stayed on the island. Because this was where his family was. And Reed. Reed became something she never thought she could be. A mother. Not in name. Not legally. But in every way that mattered. One evening, the three of them sat on the rocks below the lighthouse. Sienna was drawing. Callan was reading. Reed was just watching the waves. Sienna held up her picture. It showed the three of them. Standing together. Smiling. At the top, in careful letters, she had written, "My family." Reed looked at it. Then at Sienna. Then at Callan. And she smiled. Not a small smile. Not a hesitant one. A full, unguarded, joyful smile. Because she had finally found what she had been searching for her whole life. A place where she was not just tolerated. Not just useful. A place where she was loved. The sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned orange and pink and purple. And the three of them sat there. Together. Not because they had to. Because they chose to. Every single day. 2 years later. Reed stood in front of a room full of social workers, therapists, and child advocates. She was giving a keynote speech at a national conference on trauma-informed care. The room was packed. Standing room only. She took a breath, looked out at the crowd, and began. I spent 3 years in prison for protecting my sister. When I got out, no one would hire me. No one trusted me. I was a criminal. A violent offender. A risk. The room was silent. Then I met a little girl who had not spoken in 8 months. A girl everyone said was too broken to reach. And I did not try to fix her. I just sat with her. Drew with her. Let her know she was not alone. Reed paused. And she taught me something. Healing does not come from credentials or degrees or institutions. It comes from presence. From showing up. From sitting in the pain and not running away. She looked around the room. If you take nothing else from this conference, take this. The kids you work with do not need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. They need you to stay. Even when it is hard. Even when it hurts. Because that is what love is. Not the absence of struggle. But the choice to keep showing up anyway. The room erupted in applause. Reed stepped off the stage. Her hands were shaking. But her heart was full. Her phone buzzed. A message from Callan. We are watching the live stream. Sienna says you were amazing. I agree. Reed smiled. Typed back. Tell her I will be home soon. Home. She had never thought she would have one. But now she did. A lighthouse on an island. A man who had learned to be a father. A girl who had learned to speak again. And a woman who had learned that family was not something you were born into. It was something you built. One day at a time. One choice at a time. Reed walked out of the conference center and into the cool evening air. She looked up at the sky. Thought about the island. About the people waiting for her there. And she smiled. Because she was not a criminal. Not a risk. Not a mistake. She was a mother. A partner. A healer. She was home. The lighthouse beam swept across the water. Inside the cottage, Sienna sat at the kitchen table, working on her homework. Callan sat beside her, helping with a math problem. The door opened. Reed stepped inside, shaking rain from her jacket. How was it? Callan asked. Good. Reed said. Really good. Sienna jumped up and ran to her. Hugged her tight. Reed held her. Kissed the top of her head. Miss me? Sienna pulled back. Looked up at her. And grinned. Always. Reed laughed. Yeah. Me too. They sat down at the table. The three of them. Together. And outside, the ocean rolled in. The wind howled. The lighthouse stood tall. A beacon in the dark. A promise that no matter how lost you are, there is always a way home. And sometimes, home is not a place. It is the people who choose to stay. If this story moved you, do me a favor. Share it with someone who needs to hear that healing is possible. That second chances are real. That family is not about blood. It is about who stays. Subscribe to Tales of Desire with Mr. Walker for more stories that remind us what it means to be human. And tell me in the comments, who in your life showed up when no one else would? Because those are the people who change everything. Those are the people who save us. Not with grand gestures. Not with money or power. But with presence. With patience. With love. The kind of love that sits in the dark and waits for the light. The kind of love that never leaves. That is the love that heals. That is the love that lasts. And that is the love we all deserve. End.